Let me go ahead and tell you something uncomfortable right out of the gate. If Carl Jung were alive today, he wouldn't be hiding in a dusty psychology textbook. He'd be everywhere on YouTube, thumbnails, podcast clips, self improvement TikToks, right next to words like shadow work, trauma, masculinity, feminine energy, and why you keep dating the same emotionally unavailable person. And Freud? Freud would be subtweeted to death. Because here's the truth. Freud explained where your problems came from. Jung tried to explain why your soul feels itchy even when your life looks fine. Today, we're going to break down why Freud and Jung split in one of the most dramatic intellectual divorces in psychology. We're going to talk about why Jung lost academic respect but won the culture war a century later. Why shadow work is trending right now, and what most influencers, of course, are getting absolutely wrong, and how to actually use Jungian ideas to fix modern problems like procrastination, anxiety, self-sabotage, without turning into a crystal hoarding goblin. This is not pop psychology, my dudes. This is myth, neuroscience, depth psychology, and a little heresy. Uh-oh. Let's go. So in order to understand Jung, to really understand Jung, we have got to start with his mentor, Freud. I mean, this was the man who absolutely kicked the door down on the unconscious. Before Freud, Western psychology mostly believed you were conscious, rational, and in total control. Freud said, cute theory, wrong. Freud gave us 3 bombs that still shape psychology today. And what were those bombs? Let me see. First, we're talking about the unconscious. Most of your behavior is driven by forces that you don't even see. It's your hopes, it's your dreams, it's all the stuff that's buried deep down, and you're not even necessarily aware that it's there, but it's affecting you in a major way. Thanks, Freud. Number 2, we've got defense mechanisms, things like repression, right? Where you bury down, that anxiety or those issues down deep. You hide them in the unconscious and you forget about them. Or you've got projection, where you take your emotional state and all of a sudden you're seeing it on everyone else. You're projecting it like a projector onto them. We've got denial, which is essentially denying the truth to live in a fantasy world. And we've got a lot more. Now, defense mechanisms were basically your way, or your mind's way, of defending itself against ego-producing anxiety. All right, and that's all it is. And so you build these things up as a child, right? Because your little brain, your little mind can't handle these things at such a young age. So you come up with like quick shortcuts. The problem is defense mechanisms come back out in adulthood. Number 3, we've got conflict, right? Conflict. Basically, Freud said your mind is not a democracy. It's essentially a battlefield, right? And Freud's model was mechanical, almost industrial, if you will. He had this thing called the id, which was your primal drives, pleasure, libido. It sort of operated on this thing called the pleasure principle, which means, I want immediate gratification. Give it to me now. So, someone primarily controlled by their id would commit a crime because they wanted whatever it was. They wouldn't think about the actual circumstances. They wouldn't think about the consequences. And that's where the ego comes in. The ego is basically like your personality. It is your conscious, and it resides mostly in the consciousness, according to Freud. Right? It's not down deep in the water, under the surface, hidden away in the dark depths, right? Like the id mostly is. right? The ego basically is like, imagine it's kind of like it's like it's like a diplomat, right? You take your id, and then you've got this other guy, the super ego, and this is your internalized authority. This is your guilt. This is your conscious. This is the little angel on your shoulder where the id is the little devil, right? And then you got the ego in the middle being like, hey, guys, can we please just get along? Yeah, morality, I get it. It's wrong to hurt someone. Yeah, you want to hurt someone so you can take their money. Here's my thinking. I don't want to go to jail. So the ego is really based in reality. All right. So you've got the id, it's kind of like your bad side. The superego, it's kind of like the good side. And your ego is kind of like you. And yes, as we've heard many times before, Freud talked a lot about sex. Probably too much. Sometimes hilariously too much. But here's what people miss. Libido didn't just mean sex. It actually meant life energy, which includes things like your motivation, your drive, right? And Freud was obsessed with pathology. I mean, he went deep into stuff like neurosis, right? He was one of the first people to really get into this stuff. Hysteria, repression. And the reason was because he was working basically in a world that had been traumatized by war. He was working in a world that was still sort of embedded in Victorian morality, right? And quite frankly, he was working in a world that was sort of like moving towards industrial alienation. And so what happened is he had a lot of women, typically middle to upper class women, that would come in with these disorders that were like hysteria. Turns out they were actually conversion disorders, many of them, which I'll get to in another episode. But basically, Freud asked the question, what happened to you that broke you? Right? And he would ask this of all his patients, and maybe not in those words, but that's what he was getting to. Now, Jung, on the other hand, had a much scarier question. You ready? He asked, what parts of you never got to exist at all? So, Carl Jung was Sigmund Freud's chosen heir. He was handpicked. He was groomed, right? Practically psychoanalytic royalty, if you will. Now, Freud literally called Jung his crown prince and the Joshua to my Moses. I mean, Freud was looking for a successor who wasn't Jewish, specifically to prove that psychoanalysis wasn't just a Jewish science, but a universal one. This is something that Freud had to sort of like deal with his entire career, right? It was a strategic high stakes bromance. And then Jung did the unforgivable thing. He grew a spine and stopped being a reductionist. Jung looked at dreams, ancient myths, global religions, symbols, and realized that Freud's sex-only lens was like trying to explain the entire ocean by looking at a single bucket of salt water. It ain't happening. So, Jung proposed 3 ideas that pretty much shattered Freud's framework and honestly made Freud's eye twitch. Number 1, the collective unconscious. Now, if you don't know what this is, if you're not a Psych 101 or 102 student, right, the collective unconscious was what Jung argued your mind was. He said it's not just a dumpster fire for your own repressed childhood traumas, right? He said you have that, that's your unconscious, but then you also have an inherited biological hard drive containing psychological structures shared across the entire species. I mean, modern genomics and epigenetics are actually starting to back this stuff up. I mean, we know trauma and behavioral predispositions can be passed down through the DNA. Jung was just 100 years early to the party. I mean, he actually thought you could access memory traces from your past ancestry, not just your own experiences, right? So it was a little mystical, it was a little strange, it was a little out there, very spiritual, right? Number 2, Jung believed in something called the archetypes. Now, these aren't just cool stories, my dudes. They are pretty cool stories, but he believed in things like the shadow. Another one was the hero, the trickster, right? And he actually thought that these were like universal organizing principles of the psyche, the software of the human being, if you will. Think of them like psychological blueprints. Freud saw a dream about a snake and thought, penis. Jung saw the snake and thought, the Ouroboros, the symbol of infinite transformation and the shedding of the ego. He also had this thing called individuation, right? And this was the killing blow to Freud, quite frankly, because Freud wanted to make you functional, right? Basically a cog in the machine that doesn't scream as much. Jung wanted to make you integrated, right? He didn't want to cure your weirdness. He wanted you to meet your demons, shake their hands, and absorb their power. Yeah, he wanted you to become the most complete version of yourself, even if that version was socially totally inconvenient. Yeah, I've accepted my shadow side as evidenced by my life. Freud, he didn't just hate these things. He didn't hate these ideas. They terrified him. They terrified him. To Freud, the unconscious was a basement full of trash. I mean, to Jung, it was essentially a beautiful cathedral. And I mean, for Freud, who was trying to say that all negativity and bad stuff comes from the unconscious, and you have Jung saying, embrace it, baby, right? This caused a split. Now, the Freud-Jung split wasn't just petty falling out. I mean, it was a total philosophical war for the soul of the 20th century, my dudes. Freud, he was desperate for psychology to be hard science. He really wanted to be legit. Because again, Freud was dealing with all these people, that were basically trying to turn psychology into psychometrics, measurements, right? Reaction time, drop a ball, see how long it takes you to realize the ball is dropping and for you to catch it, stuff like this. I mean, he wanted it to be science. I mean, he wanted it to be predictable, medical, and above all, respectable, right? Because he wanted it to enter the cold halls of Vienna, right? He was trying to build a microscope. Now, Jung, on the other hand, he was willing to talk about gods. He was willing to talk about alchemy, right? Astrology and the numinous, that feeling of awe that science usually tries to ignore. Now, Freud believed religion was a universal obsessional neurosis, basically a mass delusion for people who couldn't handle reality. Jung, he argued that religion was the psyche's native language. He believed that if you took away people's myths, they wouldn't become rational, they would just become nihilistic and destructive. Look at the world today. Now, the tension famously peaked in 1909 during a boat trip to America. Freud, ever the control freak, right? He refused to share his own dreams for analysis because he feared it would lose his authority. Jung's response? At that moment, you lost it anyway. Savage. This dude was savage. I mean, Freud's mantra was basically like, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Jung's vibe was, sure, but sometimes that cigar is a phallic symbol of the unconscious fire of transformation, my dudes. And why are you so obsessed with the tobacco, Sigmund? Okay, I'm paraphrasing. But Jung was that guy. I mean, he was that guy. He drove Freud crazy, and this was he was supposed to be the crown prince. Now, by 1913, the divorce was finalized. I mean, the papers were sent to the judge. He'd signed off. This thing was over. And Freud went nuts. I mean, he accused Jung of being a mystic and a crackpot. He tried to totally discredit him, right? Jung accused Freud of being a dogmatic tyrant who had turned psychoanalysis into a religion of his own. Now, for about 70 years, history sided with Freud's clinical pill for every problem approach, right? But as we see the limits of the purely medicalized mental health today, Jung's search for meaning is making a massive, data-backed comeback. It turns out humans can survive a lot of stuff, but we can't survive a total lack of meaning. Now, why is Jung back? Why now? I mean, if you've been on TikTok or YouTube lately, come to Planting Thoughts and Plant the Spark, baby. You've seen it though, right? I mean, you've seen Jung all over the place. I mean, shadow work is in every other freaking thumbnail, and it has nothing to do with actual shadow work most of the time. I mean, Jung is trending harder in 2026 than he ever did in 1920. But why? Because modern life has perfected the art of creating functional adults with fragmented souls. We have built a world where you can pay your rent on time, hit every KPI at work, maintain a pristine, high-performing LinkedIn presence, and still feel an agonizing sense of emptiness, anxiety, and a tendency for self-sabotage that you can't even explain. I mean, there's a failure of the symptom fix, right? For decades, we've relied on the standard model of mental health. You've got CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and it helps you manage symptoms really well, right? It is a great patch for the software. We've got medication that stabilizes your mood. It's like the coolant for the engine. We've got behaviorism, which trains your habits, but none of these actually address the meaning collapse, right? I mean, people are realizing that fixing a symptom isn't the same thing as finding a soul. Neuroscience is finally catching up to what Jung intuited a century ago. We now know that emotional integration is inseparable from neural health. Studies in effective neuroscience confirm that suppressed emotional material doesn't just vanish. When you push down a part of your identity, like your anger, I don't know, your ambition, your grief, right? The associated neural circuits remain partially activated. You've pushed it down into that unconscious, right? You're trying to forget about it. They're still firing off. I mean, they become unintegrated. And this leads really to a rigid firing pattern that we experience as chronic anxiety or intrusive thoughts. And this is right from Siegel in 2012. Avoided parts of your identity, they don't stay in the basement. I mean, they resurface as things like procrastination, which is your shadow's way of saying, I hate this task. Or they show up as compulsions, which is your brain's way of seeking a sensory reset. My dudes. The brain isn't just a pleasure-seeking machine. It is a pattern recognition engine. And it seeks narrative coherence, right? If your persona, the mask you wear, is too different from your shadow, which is, your true messy self, then your brain registers a cognitive mismatch. And that mismatch feels like a permanent low-grade buzzing of something gone wrong. Shadow work? This isn't spiritual fluff, my guys. It is the process of taking those unintegrated rogue neural circuits and bringing them back into the main framework. I mean, Jung and neuroscience, they go hand in hand, my guys, which is pretty ironic considering the fact that Jung was basically being completely discredited as an unscientific dork, and Freud was supposed to be the science guy. I mean, when you bring those rogue neural circuits back into the main framework, you're basically moving from being a good person to being a whole person, right? Because as Jung famously said, I would rather be whole than good. Because a good person is just someone who has hidden their teeth. A whole person, they know they have teeth, and they choose when to use them. And this is why Jung is exploding on social media. I mean, in an age of performative perfection, people are starving for authentic integration. I mean, we are so tired of being told by society and our parents and the influencers how to act, how to be. We want a whole self back. Guys, people don't want to be cured of being human. They want to be initiated into it. Some people for the first time in their entire life. But what exactly is the shadow, right? What it is and what it isn't. We need to clean this up because TikTok has basically butchered it. TikTok is a joke. The shadow is not just your evil side. The shadow is everything you learned was unacceptable to be, right? Things like anger. Little Johnny, stop it. Stop doing that tantrum. Neediness, ambition, sensitivity, sexuality, assertiveness. Come on. The shadow forms through adaptation. If I'm angry, I lose love. If I'm emotional, I'm weak. If I want too much, I'm bad. So the psyche buries those traits. The neuroscience translation? Yeah. Prefrontal inhibition of limbic signals. In other words, the logical part is suppressing the emotional part. And we know emotional suppression actually increases amygdala reactivity. You become more reactive to emotions, and they're usually much bigger. Guys, repressed material shows up as stress, impulsivity, projection, right? You don't eliminate the shadow, you integrate it. Unintegrated shadow equals self-sabotage. Integrated shadow equals power, clarity, boundaries, your authentic self. Now, how does shadow work fix modern problems? How does it fix something like, I don't know, procrastination? How does it fix procrastination? Because procrastination really isn't laziness. It's really often repressed aggression. So the shadow question would be, who would I disappoint if I succeeded? The hidden fear might be something like, I don't know, outgrowing family roles, becoming visible for the first time in your little life, owning your ambition. It's okay to want more for yourself. And so the shadow work that we do today, right, is all about integration. So what's the, integration move here? You name the aggressive drive, and then you channel it intentionally. How would it deal with another modern problem? I don't know, something like relationship anxiety. The shadow work would say, you're not anxious. You're not anxious. You are not anxious. You are disowning need. So the shadow question would be, what would happen if I admitted how much I want connection? The shadow integration, you own your dependency needs without shame. It's okay to want connection, guys. Ladies, it's okay to want that other person. Don't become fully engulfed by them, but wanting someone is okay because if you admit this, it reduces the anxious avoidance cycling, right? I mean, if you take attachment theory, which we've talked about multiple times on here, and you overlap it with Jung, right? I mean, it's almost the same thing here. It's beautiful. What about self-sabotage? How do we deal with that? If I stay small, I say stay safe. The shadow work would require integration. So you would take conscious risk because you want the symbolic death of your old identity, right? It's okay to have individuation discomfort. I mean, growth feels like anxiety because it is. Here's the plot twist. Jung isn't anti-science anymore. I mean, modern frameworks align with him perfectly. Neuroscience, emotional integration trumps suppression. Humanistic psychology, right? Authenticity, self-actualization. Those go right along with Jungian concepts. Now, if Jungian shadow work sounds a little too mystical or heavy for you, let's look at the 2026 gold standard for emotional architecture. It's called IFS. This is a new one, Internal Family Systems. Well, personally, I like to call IFS shadow work with a clipboard. While Jungian work is like exploring a dark cave with a torch, IFS is like walking into that same cave with a headlamp and a spreadsheet. It's based on the multiplicity of mind theory, right? The psychological fact that you aren't a single I. You are a system of sub-personalities or parts, all revolving around a core self. You've got 3 players in your head, right? The exiles. These are the true shadow. They are the parts of you that carry the raw trauma. I mean, the shame and the too much emotions from your childhood. You've locked them in the basement so you can survive, my dudes. Part 2, you've got the managers. These are like your proactive protectors, right? They are the perfectionists, the planners. It's like the LinkedIn persona. Their entire job is to keep you performing so the basement door stays shut. And then you've got the firefighters. These are the reactive protectors. When the exile's pain starts to leak out, when you feel that old, familiar sting of unworthiness, the firefighter rushes in to douse the flames. This looks like doom scrolling, binge eating, sudden outbursts, or BFRBs. They don't care about your health. They just want the pain to stop right now. And so the clinical pivot here, the brilliance of IFS really, and why it's exploding in peer-reviewed trauma research, by the way, is that it's non-pathologizing. It assumes there are no bad parts. Even your most self-destructive habit is seen as a protector that is simply overworked and is using an outdated script from when you were 5 years old. Instead of fighting your shadow, IFS teaches you to unblend. You move from saying, I am angry, to a part of me is angry. And that tiny linguistic shift creates neurological space. It allows your prefrontal cortex, right, to observe the amygdala without being hijacked by it. You stop being the fire and you start being the firefighter's boss. I mean, Jung gave us the map of the woods. IFS gives us the protocol to actually talk to the monsters and bring them home. It's not about killing your demons. It's about giving them a better job description, right? I mean, cognitive science too. Meaning, right? Meaning making, it stabilizes your identity. I mean, this is all Jungian. Jung didn't reject science, even though they said he did. He rejected reductionism. And now psychology is shadowing back to the real work that he did. Because shadow work is not about indulging darkness. I don't care what TikTok tells you. And by the way, TikTok sucks. It's about owning responsibility for it, right? It's not about indulging the darkness. It's about owning responsibility for it. If you integrate your shadow, you're going to become a less reactive person because you're owning it. You're going to become less manipulative. It's just a part of you, not your whole self, right? And that's something you have to repress to pretend that it's not a part of you. You're going to become less passive aggressive. If you don't do this work, you're going to project it onto enemies, partners, ideologies. And quite frankly, that's how personal psychology becomes political chaos. Unintegrated shadows scale really badly. Freud might have taught us why we're broken. Jung taught us how to become whole. And in a world obsessed with optimization, productivity, and external validation, Jung reminds us, guys, you don't need to be fixed. You need to be integrated. The shadow you're avoiding is the power you're missing. That is not mysticism. That's psychology with teeth. I'm Mike. This is Planting Thoughts, my dudes, the podcast with teeth. And next time you feel stuck, ask yourself, what part of me am I still afraid to let live? Later.